My name's Fiammetta Rocco and I'm the literary editor of The Economist. With me today is William Dalrymple, probably now the best known British historian of India. William has written 8 books covering a huge array of subjects, but his new book about the first Afghan war, entitled The Return of the King, really is the book that he was born to write. William, we're starting in Afghanistan at the beginning of the 19th century. The foreigners you're talking about are Brits working for the East India Company, they're French soldiers washed up from Napoleonic wars, they're adventurers of every kind. These are the people who become the players in what was known as the Great Game. What was at stake?
This is the very beginning of this contest between the two great imperial powers of the day, Imperial Russia and the East India Company, Imperial Britain, if you like. And both of them, anyone that looks at the map can see the British have been moving northwards and westwards up the Ganges and are now one side of the Himalayas. The Russians have been moving southwards and eastwards and now the other side of the Himalayas. There's still quite a lot of land in between them, but the direction and the fact that these two great empires are going to rub up against each other is quite clear. And so at this period, for the first time, you have the beginning of what the British called the Great Game and what the Russians call, in a rather more evocative phrase, the Tournament of Shadows. And both sides, well, initially the British, then the Russians, are beginning to send spies, cartographers, intelligence agents into this blank space on the map, realizing that it's becoming increasingly geopolitically important.
It's not regime change so much as regime creation.
The British want a bit of both. They have this very suitable candidate sitting in their care in Ludhiana. This is the grandson of Ahmad Shah Durrani, who created the Durrani Empire. But the Hawks want to just replace him, put their own puppet king in, and control Afghanistan in proxy. Exactly the same sort of game as people were playing in Iraq and Afghanistan at the beginning of this century, after 9/11. But as in our own day, it proves more difficult. And Afghanistan has this habit of sucking people in. They think they can go in, put in a friendly regime, get out, and it just never happens like that.
But of course it all went terribly wrong. What happened?
They invade Afghanistan in 1839, and by taking this sort of suicidal, mad route through uncharted passes, they so surprise the Afghans when they finally turn up. They lose half the army in the way through thirst, and they get lost, and snipers, and the whole thing is a catastrophe for the British. And yet such is the surprise when they emerge at the back end of Kandahar with this army that all the rulers flee, and they capture Afghanistan with barely a shot being fired, and they install their puppet king. And so overconfident are they, and so easy has been the conquest, that they begin to make very, very foolish decisions. They decide not to occupy the great fortress of Kabul, the Bala Hissar, which is on a knob of rock and enormously strong and easily fortified. They build a kind of almost undefended cantonment out of wood in the valley bottom, at the bottom of Kabul, overlooked on all sides by hills. They also import all their memsahibs, all the women come up, and they talk about possibly moving the summer capital of British India from Simla in the Himalayas up to Kabul, because the climate's so good. And for the first winter, everything seems to be going very well. They have amateur theatricals, the memsahibs plant kitchen gardens, they remark on how incredibly well the potatoes and their radishes and their gooseberries grow. They play cricket. One regiment has even brought a pack of foxhounds, and they go out hunting jackals. So when the uprising does break out in 1841, in November, largely inspired by the fact that the British are taking estates from the old nobility and sleeping with the Afghan women. Because of this, the Afghans rise up and declare jihad in November 1841, and it is a catastrophe. The two British leaders, Macnaghten and Burns, are killed within the first weeks, and the leaderless British lose their stores, and they lose their ammunition, their food and their ammunition, and are starved into surrender within 3 weeks. They surrender on the promise of safe passage back to India, and they agree to march out with only their small arms in the middle of winter through the coldest Afghan January. On the 6th of January 1842, 18,000 men, women and children, 5,000 troops, the rest civilians, march out of the Kabul cantonment into the snowdrifts. 6 days later, one man, Dr. Brydon, makes it through to Jalalabad. and even his horse doesn't make it. His horse dies in the gates. Everyone else is either captured, taken hostage, or slaughtered. But of course, for the Afghans, this is their Trafalgar, their Waterloo, their Battle of Britain, their freedom struggle, their Yorktown, all rolled into one. This is the great story of national liberation for the Afghans. And the figures in it are still national heroes. The diplomatic area of Kabul is to this day known as Wazir Akbar Khan, after the main resistance leader, or certainly the man who's remembered in Afghan mythology for being the main resistance leader. And when I travelled around Afghanistan and followed the route of the retreat, every peasant in every village knew the names. Names like Burns and McNaughton, long forgotten in England, are kind of demon figures that old men will still sort of threaten their children with, like Victorian children were threatened with Boney, Napoleon.
And of course, when you went to Afghanistan, you travel around to a lot of the different sites. We're supposed to learn from history. What are the lessons that were not learnt here?
The simple lesson, I think, that you can see over and over again is you don't muddle in Afghanistan. The reason you don't muddle in Afghanistan is not just that the Afghans are terrific guerrilla fighters, which is clearly the case. It's also the fact that economically, occupying Afghanistan is a disaster for any power that tries to do it. It looks enormously inviting on the map. If you're a strategist sitting in a war room in London or Washington or indeed Moscow, you see this great space. You realize that if you can just sit there, you can control the whole region. When you get there, though, what you find is that there's nothing to tax. If you invade Iraq, you can run off with the oil revenues. If you invade the Punjab, you can tax the farmers and the rich merchants. If you invade Afghanistan, you have to garrison every single valley, but there's no tax. There's nothing you can take out to pay for the occupation. So you hemorrhage money. The company went bankrupt because of this war, had to sell off most of its shares and never recovered. The company collapses and is wound up in 1858 as a result of this. The Russians, the occupation of Afghanistan and the Russian withdrawal from Afghanistan is the beginning of the end of the Soviet system. Today, obviously, America is hemorrhaging billions of dollars into Afghanistan with no results every day. But the people that have really got it sussed, it seems to me, are the Chinese. The Chinese have not sent a single soldier into Afghanistan, but they have succeeded in buying up the entire mineral rights of the country, huge amounts of copper and lots of rare earths, these minerals that we're going to need for our touchscreen appliances over the next 50 years, which are very rare to find. The Chinese have bought up the mineral rights en masse, and they're now building a railway line from Kashgar up the Wakhan corridor to get the stuff out. They haven't fired a bullet, and they're going to be the first people, if they manage to get away with this, and to get these minerals out without putting an occupying army in. It's a big if, but we'll see. Then the Chinese may be the first people to really crack the Afghan nut.
William, what do you consider to be the real heart of this book?
The emotional heart of this book is this extraordinary story of the 6 days of the retreat from Kabul, when these 18,000 men, women and children are slaughtered in incredible numbers. And I realized very early on that I couldn't possibly write the book without doing that retreat. The trouble is, today, the retreat, which ends, the last stand of the British is this village called Gundamuk, which today backs onto Tora Bora, where obviously bin Laden also had his last stand. And today it's deep in Taliban territory. It's a very dangerous area. And I couldn't work out how I could possibly get to see all this in any kind of safety or any at least reasonable chance of making it out to tell the story alive. But I was very lucky because the head of the secret police in Kabul turned out to be a fan of my last book, The Last Mughal. And I actually got sort of hauled in by the NSD, the Afghan security. And Amrullah Saleh, who was then Kabul's security chief, sort of grilled me on what I was doing and what I planned to do. And having decided that he wanted to help the project, Amrullah Saleh linked me up with this guy called Anwar Khan Jigdalik, who was a former Hezb-e Islami commander who'd just come over and been welcomed into Karzai's government. And he came from that area. He said, this is the one man that can get you there in safety. So we set off from the diplomatic area, from Wazir Akbar Khan, in a pickup with Anwar Khan Jigdalik driving. Anwar Khan is a mountain of a man. He's the former captain of the Afghan Olympic wrestling team. He's about 11 foot tall and 11 foot wide. This old Mujahideen commander. Totally fearless, completely terrifying guy. On arrival in Jalalabad, we found that we'd had a very, very narrow escape. Although Gundamuk had been safe for the previous 9 months, that particular day the government had decided to drive out from Jalalabad to destroy the poppy crop. The villagers had resisted, they'd brought in the Taliban, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, as we were heading out of Kabul, there'd been the most enormous firefight in Gandamak. 9 police vehicles had been blown up, 100 hostages taken. The following day, the elders came into Jalalabad from Gandamak to negotiate. There was a jirga. So I went with Anwar Khan and attended the jirga, and we sat on this hilltop watching Predator drones take off from Kandahar airport. In films, you see only single Predator drones, but in Kandahar, it's like a kind of London taxi rank. These things are taking off, these spooky-looking unmanned planes taking off to spy out the whereabouts of the Taliban in the mountains surrounding Jalalabad. And at the end, I went up to the elders from Gandamak and said to them, do you see any parallels? They said, it's exactly the same. Each time they come here saying that they are here for our interests. In fact, they're there only for themselves. And one man told me a story. He said, we were called by some Americans into a hotel in Jalalabad about a month ago. And the American officer said to me, why do you hate us? And I said, we hate you because you enter our houses, you beat our women, you kick our children. We cannot accept this. We will break your teeth, and after your teeth are broken, you will go, just as the Russians and the British went before you. It's only a matter of time. And then the final words they said were, we are the crossroads of the world. We control all the region around us, but we don't have the power to control our own destiny. The Americans are finished. Everyone knows that this is the last days of the Americans. But next, they said, it will be China.